My name is Donnachadh McCarthy. I was invited here with two hats. One is I'm the author of The Prostitute State, which is a book about the corruption in British politics. And second hat is I'm helping to organise Occupy Rupert Murdoch Week at the end of March outside Rupert Murdoch's palace in London Bridge.
How do we get from Rupert Murdoch to millions dying and thousands being evicted?
Okay, well, just on the issue of the Iraq War, it's very clear in Alistair Campbell's diaries that Murdoch was ringing Blair day after day, 3 times in the run-up to the week of the war. So whilst 2 million of us were protesting on the streets, pleading with our government not to go to war because we knew what would happen and the consequences are there to this day, Murdoch had direct access to the Prime Minister and was saying, my papers will back you. If you go to war, ignore those people in the street. So therefore, Blair was able to go into the House of Parliament knowing that the major media billionaire had his back. And so therefore, that, in my view, there's a direct link between Murdoch and the tragedy of Iraq and the creation of ISIS and the people who are dying to this day as a consequence of terrorism globally.
What do you think Murdoch's motivation for that support for the war was?
Good question. I mean, he's obviously very pro-Israel and the Israeli agenda. That's been the main agenda there. But also the billionaire corporations have an oil agenda. The Iraq War was driven by the Project for the New American Century, which has brought Bush the philosophical backing to Bush presidency. And they were very clear, we need to tackle the Iraq dictatorship because of control of oil. People say it's radical, left-wingers come up with these theories, but it was on their own website. But yet for us to enunciate that is radical, and that actually shows how perverted our media has perverted the dialogue in the press, so that when you actually say the truth, even by a right-wing corporation, you repeat their words, because you're not establishment, you're seen as being untruthful. Extraordinary.
Yes, very, very. And is there a personal thing that's brought you to this, to want to highlight these injustices? In my talk this morning, I talked about my own personal. I had an accident. I was a dancer. I didn't give a damn about the environment or politics. Saw what I ended up in the middle of the Amazon forest. Saw the genocide and destruction that was happening there, and that was my awakening. And so I came back gutted. And I felt I must do something personally about this. And I felt the most important thing I could do was change my own life. And then that led me into the political, changing your own life is great and wasn't really important if you want to have integrity and do as I say, not do as I do rather than do as I say. But it's always only the first step. And once you start doing that, you realise you've got to take it out into the community and then you've got to take it into the political sphere. So yes, I got involved in the political sphere and I saw how a major political party in Britain isn't free to assert the policies it wishes to, and secondly how it's been captured by the corporate lobbying industry. So in my passion to save the planet and save the people who are dying because of destruction in the environment, I have to get involved in the fight for real media. And this is the Liberal Democrats you're talking about, that you're involved
I was involved in. I was a member of the party for 12 years, I was on the board of the party for 7 years, I was deputy chair of the party for 2 years. Despite having massive democratic successes in the party and policy and reform, none of them were implemented because around the leadership is a core of corporate lobbyists who call the shots.
Amongst the Liberal Democrats, and is this since the election, since they became part of the government, or before that?
No, it's been there for years. Kennedy's time, Ashdown's time. The head of Paddy Ashdown's office was a political lobbyist. The head of Charles Kennedy's office was a political lobbyist. The head of Clegg's office was a political lobbyist.
And what effect does that have from an insider's, if I can call you an insider?
Yes.
What effect did that have on, for example, when policies come forward?
Okay. I'll give you 2 examples. The first example was, for example, let's pick genetic engineering. I'm an environmentalist. I understand that pollen contaminates neighbouring fields. I proposed a policy. It took us numerous attempts at conference. They kept suppressing it. They kept not allowing us to debate it. I kept coming back. They eventually were forced out of a policy group. We came out of a policy group. There was a battle between the corporates and us on the lobby group. We produced a policy that was pro-environment. And then it went to the Federal Policy Committee. Normally that's a formality, and the members of the policy working parties are not allowed to speak at it. But I thought, I've spent 4 years trying to get this policy adopted, I'll go along to the meeting. Turned up to the meeting, there was a Lib Dem MEP, ex-MEP, who's now working for a GM lobbyist, given speaking rights at the federal level on the policy paper the party had just produced in a democratic process for 2 years.
So essentially, the GM lobby, in your opinion, bought their way into influence that policy of one of Britain's major political parties.
Correct. Another example is the Lib Dems have opposed nuclear power for a generation. I was passionate. I really liked that policy. It's one of the reasons why I was joining the party. When I was on the international policy group, I proposed that we should be in favour of a renewable energy economy. And the establishment moved in and said, no, we can't use that phrase, we must use a low carbon economy. And that was like around 10 years ago. And that signalled to me that the inside corporate lobbyists around the leadership were going to drop the nuclear policy as soon as we got into power, because renewable energy economy excludes nuclear, low carbon embraces it. So the party stood on an anti-nuclear platform at the last election. But we have to remember that the treasurer for Nick Clegg's general election campaign is Lord Clement Jones, who is a lobbyist and has been a lobbyist for the nuclear industry. Ed Davy's brother is involved in the nuclear industry, and so therefore when Ed Davy took over as energy minister, he suddenly had a conversion on the road to Damascus, and so the Lib Dems in power, and this wasn't part of the coalition agreement. It was not part of the coalition agreement. Instead of implementing the policy they had for a generation, not only have trying to force it through in British policy, but they're also trying to ram it through all of Europe. The British government, through the Lib Dems, are trying to change, and has successfully changed policy at European level in favour of nuclear. That is how the direct link between lobbying and the outcome of policies is connected.
It looks to me, as an outside observer, I suppose, that the Lib Dems are almost certainly going to get wiped out at the next election because of the way they've got into bed with the Tories. Obviously, there's all kinds of policies that you say they've changed because they've been lobbied, not because they're part of a coalition.
It's a much wider, more complex story than that. But that is part of it, as well as the lobbying. But also, you have to realise that there is there's been a right-wing coup in the Lib Dems under Clegg, that similar to the coup that Blair carried out in the Labour Party. The structure is basically money and lobbyists within a party identify an upcoming, good-looking, intelligent right-winger, and they anoint them as the party leader in waiting. They fund their leadership campaign, they fund the think tanks around them, and they have the corporate billionaire right-wing contacts in that media. And so you put all those together, you've got a package, and by the time the election happens, they are the leader designate. It's been selected, it's been nominated. So Clegg was actually being trailed in the right-wing media as the next Lib Dem leader, even before he became an MP. Even before he became MP, he was nominated and anointed by the right-wing president. Now, how does that happen? Through the lobbyists that are around Clegg and the connections with the media. And so we are manipulated as the public and as the members of political parties. You think, oh, he's the obvious person to do it. But he was a right-winger funded by a private equity, and private equity, remember, 70% of the private equity companies in the world are based in the Cayman Islands. So money via the tax saving system flows into the selection of the leaderships within the two progressive parties. So by the time they get into power or close to power, instead of being progressive parties, they've been hijacked by the suits, that we used to call them. So that's the other part of this process.
I'm amazed why they'd even bother, though. I mean, yes, we've had a hung parliament this time, but it's the first time in 40 odd years. that there's had to be a coalition. So do you think that lobbyists prepare for the eventuality of a coalition?
Our experience of it, as a party gets closer to power, it gets more suits. The lobbyists move in because they are more interested in access to the corridors of power. And so, for example, I first became aware of this when I was first elected to the federal executive. It was coming towards it was when the peak of Paddy Ashdown's negotiations with Tony Blair to create the project. The project was nonsensical from the outside because what it was doing was that you had to me, a centre-right Blair government with a large majority in Parliament doing a deal with a centre-left party outside of government. In the obvious role that the electorate had given the Liberal Democrats in that Parliament was to be the progressive opposition to Blair. So you had the right-wing Tories, centre-right Blair party, and you had the centre-left Lib Dems. So why would you do a deal? And the conclusion I came to, I looked at who was around Ashdown, and all of them were corporate lobbyists. And they look at a political party different from you and I do. You and I do look at a political party, ideally, for a democratic expression of the membership's vision for the country that they put out to electors and said, do you agree with it or not, and you vote for it. Their view of a political party is access to power. So if the Lib Dems did a deal with Blair, the lobbyists and the peers who were selling their services as lobbyists would then become inside the government with access to the civil servants and the decision making and the various ministers that are relevant to their corporate masters. And so that's what was happening. And that's where I became first really, really aware of the corruption at the inside and how effective and how impactful it is of our democracy.
I don't think it was possible to despise mainstream political parties more.
People slag off politicians a lot as being venal or craven. But we have to look at what happened at Leveson. Leveson Inquiry revealed that the corporate right-wing extremist press have blackmailed our political system for a generation. In my view, it's treason. I don't like to use that word lightly. In my view, the Prime Minister, John Major, revealed that Rupert Murdoch said he would remove the support of his papers if he did not endorse a negative view on the European Union. Why should one man, a billionaire, living in another country, blackmail our Prime Minister to take a policy action? And so therefore, what I'm trying to say is that is true of all the billionaire press. It's not just Murdoch, it's the invisible ones, the Rothermeres and the Desmonds and the Barclay brothers who own the other four empires. What happened for a generation is that if you as a politician want to stand up for something you believed in and took that position in Parliament, campaigned for it, and Rebecca Brooks or Paul Dacker or somebody in the Daily Express decided they just thought that was threatening to their right-wing agenda or the billionaire agenda, your sex life, your health life, your bank account, your any records that you've got, your tax records, any employment records you've had, all were open to being rifled and exposed. But not just yours, your parents, your friends, your neighbours, your kids. You had to take on the risk of every single aspect of your parents and all of those associated with you, that their lives could be destroyed and ripped to pieces by the Rebecca Brooks of the world if you stood up for what you believed in. There's not many people in this world, not to mind politicians, who are able and willing to do that. So I actually don't think that our politicians necessarily have been cowards. I think the power of the 5 billionaires is so enormous and so negative and so destructive that it blackmailed our entire democracy for a generation. And that's why it's crucial we need to tackle it.
What about the BBC? I mean, this is another media giant that's effectively, supposedly owned by, it is funded by the public. Do you think that helps in a way?
I'm in favour of the BBC existing, but there are serious issues around the BBC. First of all, the membership of its board. Chair of HSBC is chair of the BBC. That's a problem. So we need to separate corporate power from the BBC. Second issue is that the BBC exists in the sea created by the 5 billionaires. If the 5 billionaires own 80% of the press and another 18% of it is owned by investment bankers, that means 98% of the press that the BBC operates in is owned by the enemy, if you like. Sorry, that's not the right phrase, but... And so therefore, the culture that they are operating in is the culture created by these 5 men. And so it's impossible. And so they are arguing for them to have, to be, what's the word? Independent, to be fair, to be balanced. But how can you be balanced in a society and a culture that's organised and dominated by 5 billionaires? You're talking about 98 versus 2%. So what's actually happening is the BBC is being balanced between 2 versions of a right-wing agenda. And if you look at the front page of their website, they have what's in the papers. And because 98% of the papers are owned by billionaires or the 1%, obviously that's going to affect the agenda of the 1%. So the BBC has major problems there as well. And then finally, during Chris Patton's time, the head of BBC News and the deputy BBC News are ex-Murdoch directors. And the quality of journalism has collapsed in the last 3 or 4 years, a real disaster. The BBC is really important, we have to retain it, but we need to reclaim it.
Do you think there's a solution?
The thing I say to people is, it's only 5 people, you know? We have got 5 right-wing extremist billionaires have hijacked our democracy. Now, should it be on the cause of collective ability, with the intelligence and power and money that we all have, that we can't tackle 5 men? And so therefore that's, I think, to put it in perspective, because we often talk about the media. I think we need to stop talking about the media, because we create this huge edifice that is very intimidating and very disempowering for us as individual people. It is not a mainstream press, it is not the media, it is 5 extremist right-wing billionaires. I know I'm repetitive, but it's trying to explain what we're up with. So that's what we're up in, so put it into perspective. I think there's lots of fun things we can do. The most important thing we do is not give them our money. If you have Sky, you're funding Murdoch. If you buy the Times, the Sun, the Mail, you're funding these people who are destroying the wealth of the wealth of the people, because it's hijacked. It's destroying the planet. It's destroying our democratic structures. So if you buy, you're funding us. That's number one. But there's also fun things we can do. And in part of Occupy Rupert Murdoch Week, obviously we're inviting as many people as possible to come to London, in front of Murdoch's Palace, to protest and do non-violent direct action and really make it clear and loud that we want to, what needs to happen. But the second thing we're doing is actually people who can't come, but empowerment, is that we have actually taken legal advice, and it's quite fun. It is not illegal to hide the sun in a supermarket. It is illegal to steal it. So if you take the sun and you walk out with it, that's illegal. But if you take it and hide it behind the fridge, it's not illegal. It's fun. Or even if you want to be a little less dramatic, just turn over the damn thing. So pop into the local newspaper shop, and you just turn over the top page of the Sun, because they sell on the rubbish and the vile, evil stuff that's on the front page. Gotcha, that sort of stuff. Those horrible stuff, those vile headlines, the anti-immigrant stuff, the anti-women stuff, the anti-vulnerable people stuff, the anti-disabled stuff. Let's say we don't accept that. In a simple act of civil disobedience, you just turn the paper over. Or you find a copy of The Guardian or The Morning Star, and you put it on top of the Sun. Those sort of things. And then another important one, which I think, so we think the divestment campaign by the student union movement is very important, because it's actually saying making profit out of the fossil fuel industry is unethical. And we want to say making profit out of destruction of democracy and attacks on the poor and war that are resulting from the billionaire media is equally unethical. And so therefore, as part of Occupy Democracy Week, we're launching a divestment campaign and saying to people at home, contact your pension provider. If you're a member of a charity or a business, saying, are you making profit out of Murdoch? Do you have shares in News International? Do you have shares in the Daily Mail? Do you have shares in Desmond's, whatever he's called? And that's to divest and hit them where it's worth. I'm saying it's unethical for us to be making profit out of this raping of our democracy.
What effect do you think these 5 people, because that's all they are,
Yeah.
5 people.
Good, you got the message.
What effect do you think they're going to have on the election coming up?
Profound. I call UKIP, UKIP was created by the 5 billionaires. The extraordinary thing about it is that it's, for 30 years, I moved to Britain as a migrant. I'm an immigrant, I'm an Irish immigrant, I'm an EU migrant. When I moved here, I perceived myself as a European citizen and saw myself as an equal with the people I came here to work with and contribute to society. And I've worked hard and I've worked in the voluntary sector in Britain. I've made my contribution because I actually feel part of society. In the last 3 years, that concept of my being an equal citizen has changed in my subconscious and my conscious. I now see myself as a migrant, and I see myself as in danger of being, and in some ways I have become a second-class citizen because the regulations that have been introduced as a result of UKIP and the right-wing press are now actually trying to cut back on my equality as a citizen in this country. So, for example, let's say I was found guilty of some crime at a protest, doing pre-full protest, I may face deportation, which I didn't 5 years ago. So instead of just spending a fine or a small prison sentence like the ordinary equal person would do, I could now face deportation, which is exile and removal from all my friends, my roots, my life that I've created here. And so therefore, sorry, it's a bit of a personal tangent, but what I want to bring it back to is for 30 years, they have actually targeted, they first went for refugees, then they went for asylum seekers, and then they went for Bulgarians, then they went for Romanians, and then they went for East Europeans, and now they're going for EU migrants, all of us. And who's next? The fat, the pregnant, it's extraordinary what's happened. So that agenda, year after year after year on the front page, has created UKIP. And is now manifesting as a political force in Britain. And that's dragging all of the other parties to the right and has a huge effect on this general election. So, because people are fed up, they know the government's hijacked. They know that whoever they vote for, it's the bankers and the lobbying party wins. The political lobbying class wins. So they're angry. They know they're being shafted. But through the distraction into UKIP and the migrant issue, they've actually created a right-wing forces to the right of the Tory party to distract that anger. It's a huge malign effect on the general election. On the positive side, things are shifting. I think actually the SNP movement in Scotland is quite a positive movement because all I outlined about the hijacking of the Liberal Democrats by a corporate lobbying elite applies to the Labour Party writ large. In the last couple of weeks there was a huge media story about Alan Milburn, who was attacking the Labour's health policies. Coverage, wall-to-wall coverage on The Guardian, main BBC, right-wing press. None of them covered the fact that Alan Milburn is a lobbyist for the private health corporations. If you look at the nuclear industry, the list of Labour ex-ministers of energy who work for the nuclear lobbyists is that long. So I think there's a positive thing about, if you vote for Labour, you vote for the nicer lobbyists, but you are voting for a corporate lobbyist when you vote Labour, I'm afraid. And so all I outlined about Lib Dems applies to Labour as well, if not to a larger extent. So I think the actual shift in Scotland is quite interesting, because it's actually shaking up Labour. So I don't want to see a single-party Labour government, because I would say, well, we'll end up with another Blair government, which serves the interests of the corporate elite. And so I think that's a positive. I think the surge for the Greens is a positive. However, that because of the electoral system, which was successfully trashed in the referendum by the right-wing funding and by the right-wing media, has left us a system that facilitates the continuation of corporate power over our democracy. But some things are shifting in the sand.